The box was just sitting there, at the edge of the yard, wet from the night before, and inside it, something small was moving. Nan, I almost didn't stop. It was early. The kind of early where the light is still gray and the ground is cold and your breath comes out in small white clouds that disappear before you can follow them. Nemiso, but I stopped, and I looked inside. 3 kittens, tiny, not moving much, not making any sound. Their eyes were barely open, and their fur was damp. I didn't think too hard about it. I picked them up, brought them inside, and set them near the warmth of the kitchen. Nemiso, I thought I was doing a simple thing, a good thing. Nemiso, I had no idea what I had just brought into my home. If you enjoy emotional and unusual wildlife stories like this one, consider subscribing, because what these kittens turned out to be completely changed everything. Nena, by the first night, I knew something was different. Not wrong exactly, but different. Most kittens, when they're warm and fed, will sleep. They'll curl up somewhere soft and go still. They'll make small sounds, that soft, almost mechanical purring that tells you everything is okay. Nena, Wu's 3 didn't do that. They stayed awake, all 3 of them, and they watched. Not the playful watching of a curious kitten tracking a dust mote across the floor. This was something quieter, more deliberate. They tracked the light moving on the wall. They tracked the sound of my footsteps from the next room. They turned their heads slowly, almost in unison, every time something changed. Non, I set out food. Small portions, warmed, the kind of thing that should have drawn them in immediately. Non, they approached slowly, one at a time, stopping before they reached the bowl. Scanning the room again before taking a single bite, then stepping back, watching some more. It wasn't fear. I've seen frightened animals before. This wasn't that. This was awareness, a quality of attention I didn't expect from animals this small, this young. It was the kind of alertness you see in something that has spent a long time learning that the world is not always safe, that stillness is sometimes the best move, that you watch first and decide second. I told myself it was just stress. They'd been outside, they'd been cold. They'd probably been alone for a while. Animals in that situation need time. I believed that. I kept believing it for about 3 days. By day 4 I started keeping notes, not formal notes, just things I wrote down in my phone because I didn't know what else to do with them. Small observations that didn't add up to anything yet but felt like they should. Won't come close when I'm standing, will approach when I sit on the floor and go still. Don't meow, not once, not a single normal kitten sound. Watched the window for 40 minutes straight this morning. Not the bird feeder, the tree line. Their faces were unusual too, though at that point I hadn't let myself say that clearly yet. Wide, flat across the bridge of the nose, eyes set far apart and very pale, almost gold in certain light, small rounded ears that pressed low when they felt unsure. I'd grown up around cats. I'd had cats my whole adult life. I knew what domestic cats looked like when they were scared, when they were curious, when they were comfortable. I knew their language. These 3 weren't speaking it. They were speaking something older, something I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. There was a moment on the 5th day that I've thought about many times since. I was sitting on the floor near the window. I'd learned by then that sitting was better than standing, that staying still was better than moving. And the smallest of the 3 crept close enough to sniff my hand, not to be touched, not to invite contact, just to gather information. It pressed its nose to my knuckles for maybe 2 seconds, then it stepped back, sat down, and looked at me with those pale gold eyes like it was deciding something, like it was running some kind of quiet calculation I wasn't going to understand. And I felt something I didn't expect. Not warmth exactly, not the ordinary affection you feel when an animal trusts you. Something closer to reverence, like I was in the presence of something I hadn't earned yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those eyes, that stillness, the way all 3 of them moved through the house like they were memorizing it, like they were building a map. At 2 in the morning, I got up for a glass of water. Nan, and when I came back into the room, all 3 of them were awake, sitting upright, perfectly still, not watching the door, not watching each other. Nan, watching me. And I realized, for the first time, that I might not be the one taking care of them. Nan. A week went by, then 2. The kittens grew, not slowly the way you expect small animals to grow, gradually filling out, softening at the edges, but quickly, almost visibly. Like something inside them was on a schedule and it wasn't going to wait for me to catch up. Their legs got longer first, Then their chests broadened. Their paws, which had seemed oversized from the beginning, started to make more sense as the rest of them caught up. By the end of the second week, they were moving through the house differently, lower to the ground, more deliberate, each step placed with a kind of intention I'd never seen in a house cat. Then, they still didn't meow. They made sounds occasionally, a low, flat call that wasn't quite a hiss and wasn't quite a chirp, something in between, something without a name I knew. Nana, kukuka nine my nino, naimandap to feared. My neighbors had a tabby that sometimes sat on their porch. One afternoon it wandered into the yard, and one of the three spotted it through the glass. The tabby looked up, curious, tail raised, normal cat behavior. Nana ooh. What happened next was not normal cat behavior. No, none. All three of them went absolutely still. No puffing up, no arching, no hissing. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that isn't passive. The kind that is itself a response, a strategy. Nan. The tabby left after about 30 seconds. I don't think it understood what it had seen. I'm not sure I did either. By the third week, the behaviors I'd been noting quietly started becoming impossible to explain away. Nan. They climbed differently. Not the scrambling vertical climbing of a domestic kitten testing its limits. This was lateral, measured. They moved along the top edge of the bookshelf the way something moves when it knows exactly how wide its own body is, when it has done this before, when its instincts are older than the room it's in. Nan. They still avoided touch, but the avoidance had changed. In the beginning it felt like fear, wide eyes, low body, quick retreat. Now it felt like preference, like a boundary that wasn't about being scared, like they simply didn't need what I was offering, and they knew it, and they were patient about making that clear. I started doing what most people do when something doesn't fit the category they've put it in. I searched unusual kitten behavior, kittens that don't meow, kittens with flat, wide faces, wild-looking domestic cats. I went through pages. I spent evenings reading about hybrid breeds, about feral cats, about developmental differences in early separated litters. Nothing quite fit. Every description got close, and then veered off somewhere that didn't match what I was seeing in my own living room. I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake, not a small one. Retenstende. There's a particular kind of doubt that doesn't announce itself loudly. It seeps in. It shows up as a hesitation before you enter a room, as a pause before you reach out, as a question you keep almost asking but don't. I had started to love these three animals, whatever they were. I had sat on the floor for them. I had warmed their food. I had learned to move slowly and to stay quiet, and to let them come to me rather than reaching for them. I had built habits around them the way you build habits around anything you care for, but caring for something doesn't mean you understand it, and there was a growing gap between what I felt and what I knew, and that gap had started to feel like a problem I couldn't solve alone. So one afternoon I took a photo, a good one by accident, all three of them near the window, the light coming in low and sideways, their faces turned slightly toward me. You could see the flatness of their features clearly, the pale, wide-set eyes, the dense, almost layered texture of their fur, the way their ears sat low and round on the tops of their heads. I posted it to a wildlife identification group, people who knew animals, seriously knew them. I didn't write much. Just, found these three outside, thought they were strays, behavior seems unusual, any ideas? Then I set my phone down and went to make dinner. I didn't check it for about an hour. I almost wish I'd waited longer. There were 47 replies. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. 47, in under an hour, on a post I'd barely written anything on. I scrolled past the first few, people tagging other people, people saying wait and oh and someone needs to see this, until I got to the pinned response at the top. From one of the group's moderators, someone who studied wild felids, Mumna. It was short, 4 sentences. Nan, these are not domestic cats. They are not a hybrid breed. Please do not attempt to handle them as pets. Mumna, these are Pallas's cat kittens, also known as Manual, one of the oldest wild cat species on Earth. I read it 3 times, then I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and stood very still for a moment, the way they had taught me, without meaning to, over the past 3 weeks. I looked through the doorway into the living room. All 3 of them were on the shelf, watching me, as they always were. Nan, suddenly everything I had observed, the silence, the stillness, the ancient quality of their attention, the way they moved like they were navigating terrain they already knew, the way they looked at me not with fear but with a kind of measured, unhurried assessment, all of it rearranged itself into a shape that finally made sense. The rearranged itself into a shape that finally made sense. The rearranged itself into a shape that finally made sense. I hadn't rescued strays. I had been living for 3 weeks with wild animals. The moderator sent a follow-up message that night. Private, careful in tone, she asked where I was located, how long I'd had them, whether I'd contacted any wildlife authorities. I hadn't. It hadn't occurred to me, because I hadn't known there was anything to contact anyone about. She ended the message with a single line that I've thought about nearly every day since. The longer they stay, the harder this becomes, for them and for you. I knew she was right. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do about it. The next morning I woke up and everything looked the same. Same kitchen, same low winter light through the window, same 3 shapes moving quietly along the edges of the room. But something had shifted, not in them, in me. I knew what they were now. And knowing changed the way I saw every single thing they did. The way the largest one paused at the threshold between rooms before crossing it, that wasn't quirky cat behavior. That was a predator checking sightlines. The way they never rested with their backs to an open space, that wasn't preference, that was survival. The way they watched the ceiling sometimes, still and focused, as if tracking something moving above them that I couldn't see or hear, that was instinct so old it predated every house, every wall, every human hand that had ever reached toward them. They were not adapting to my world. They were tolerating it. And there is a difference. I called the wildlife contact the moderator had given me, a woman named Carol who worked with a small animal rescue organization that occasionally handled wild felids. She was calm on the phone, experienced. She didn't make me feel foolish for not knowing what I'd had in my home for 3 weeks. She said that Pallas's cats, manuls, are one of the least studied wildcat species in the world. That they are extraordinarily difficult to keep in captivity, not because they are aggressive, but because they have almost no immunity to common domestic pathogens, that the stress of captivity alone can be enough to kill them. Numko, Juwut, Nenum. She said I had probably been lucky and careful. Numko, Nenum cord. Even without knowing it, I asked her what happened next. She paused before answering, and that pause told me more than the answer did. We need to move slowly, she said, and we need to move soon. In the days that followed, I found myself watching them differently. Not the way you watch something you're caring for. The way you watch something you're memorizing. I noticed things I hadn't let myself notice before. The particular way the smallest one tucked her chin when she slept, not fully resting, just dropping below full alert. The way the middle one would sit at the window in the late afternoon when the light turned orange, perfectly motionless, face tilted slightly upward, as if remembering something. The way all 3 of them, without fail, oriented toward the north-facing wall in the evenings, not randomly. Always that wall, always that direction. There is something humbling about sharing space with a wild animal. Not the romantic version of humbling, not the kind that feels like a gift, the real kind, the kind that makes you understand how small your understanding is. How much of the world moves on frequencies you can't hear. They had never belonged to me. I understood that now. What I'd felt for them, the protectiveness, the tenderness, the quiet pride when one of them moved slightly closer, that was mine, that was human. They had simply been here, present, ancient, waiting for something I was only beginning to understand I was supposed to give them. One evening, about a week after Carol's call, I was sitting on the floor in the usual spot. The smallest one was on the windowsill. She turned and looked at me. Not the measuring look I'd come to know, something else. She held the look for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. I don't know what that meant. I don't think I'm supposed to know, but something in me went quiet, and then it happened. I was standing near the bookshelf, reaching up to straighten something, and the largest one, who had grown considerably, who was now more than twice the size of the animal I'd carried in from the yard, moved, fast, not toward me, past me. A single fluid motion triggered by my arm rising suddenly into his peripheral vision. He was across the room before I'd processed what had happened, low, silent, eyes wide, in a crouch against the far wall, not aggressive, not dangerous, but absolutely, completely wild. And I stood there with my arm still raised, and I understood something I had been quietly avoiding for days. This was not a moment that was going to get better with more time. This was a moment that was telling me the truth. Do I hold on, or do I let them go back to where they belong? I already knew the answer. I had known it since Carol's pause on the phone. I just hadn't been ready to say it yet. Cullo came on a Tuesday. She brought 2 other people, quiet, practiced in the way people become quiet when they've spent years around animals that need them to be. They moved through the house without hurry. They spoke in low voices. They assessed the 3 without reaching for them, without forcing any contact, spending a long time simply watching before they said much of anything to me. Me, I stayed in the kitchen, not because they asked me to, because I understood that my presence in the room was a variable now, that whatever I felt when I watched those 3 animals move was something I needed to hold separately from what they needed. Me, Carol came to find me after about 20 minutes. Me, she said they were healthy. Better than she expected, honestly, for 3 manual kittens that had spent 5 weeks in a house. She said I had done well. The low-stress environment, the distance I'd maintained, the unwarmed food I'd eventually stopped warming because they seemed to prefer it that way. She said small things like that mattered more than people realized. I asked her where they would go. She explained it slowly, the way she probably explained things to everyone who had been where I was standing. There was a facility, specialized, set up for exactly this, wild felids that needed to transition back. Not a zoo, not a research center, something in between, a place with open space and structured distance, and people who knew how to be present without being intrusive. From there, if they were ready, they would be moved to a managed release environment, something close to the terrain they were built for. Via the Eichspiel place, she said it would take months, maybe longer. Via the Eichspiel, she said she would keep me informed. The carriers went in gently, no chasing, no grabbing. Carol's team had a method, a careful narrowing of space that gave the 3 a path, rather than a corner. One by one they moved into the carriers on their own terms, almost as if they had decided, almost as if they had understood that this was the next thing. The smallest one paused at the entrance of hers. She turned and looked back across the room, not at me, or maybe at me, I'm still not sure. Then she walked in. The house was different after they left. Not quiet. It had always been quiet with them. They had never been loud animals. But a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes after presence, not before it. The kind that has a shape. Izzo. I didn't move anything for a few days. Left the water bowl near the window. Left the low shelf the way they'd arranged themselves on it. I don't know why exactly. It wasn't grief, not quite. It was more like respect for something that had happened in that space. Something I hadn't planned for, and hadn't fully understood until it was over. Caro sent updates through the winter. Short messages, professional, but she knew I needed them. They were adjusting well, eating, moving into larger spaces as the weeks passed. The middle one had been the first to start using the full outdoor enclosure. The largest had taken longer but was now regularly outside in the early mornings. The smallest was thriving. I read that word 3 times. Thriving. I went back in early spring. Not to the facility. Carol said that visits from previous caretakers weren't part of the protocol, and I understood that. I agreed with it. But to the area, the general landscape that matched what they were being prepared for. Low scrubland. Open sightlines in every direction. Sky that went on longer than you expected. I walked out into it alone, early in the morning when the light was still thin and cold. I didn't see them. I didn't expect to. But I stood there for a long time. And at some point, from somewhere in the brush to the north, that direction they had always turned toward in the evenings, that wall they had watched without explanation, there was a small movement, a stillness that reorganized into a shape, and then back to stillness again. I couldn't tell you what it was, but I stood very still, the way they had taught me, and after a while I turned and walked back to the car, and in that moment I understood something I hadn't before. Some things you don't rescue to keep, you rescue to let go. And maybe that's the hardest kind of love there is, the kind that asks you to want something for someone else more than you want it for yourself, the kind that looks like an ending but is actually the whole point. They were never mine. But for 5 weeks in the middle of winter, in a quiet house with gray morning light and a water bowl near the window, we were something to each other, and I think that was enough.